Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I am answering a question from someone on Instagram today, actually. I'm going to read out the whole thing and then I'm going to break it down. The question is, for how long have you been on medication after your psychosis? How did you know you were ready to stop? Because a lot of people relapse into psychosis after stopping meds, so I wonder what is the factor that made you heal? I had a psychotic episode 2 years ago, and my psychiatrist has now told me that I can stop medication to see what happens, to confirm the diagnosis of schizophrenia or not. How can I know if I'm ready to stop? Okay, there's a lot in there. All right, the first thing is that I am not a therapist, nor am I a psychiatrist. It's only a psychiatrist that can prescribe medication. What I'm sharing here is my own direct experience, and then also from wisdom, some factors that you might want to consider in terms of your relationship to medication. And I make absolutely no suggestion and give no advice because I have no idea what it is that you should do as such. All right, so this is my direct experience and some things to consider as you make your decision in conjunction with your healthcare provider. Alrighty. For how long were you on medication after your psychosis? So I had 2 episodes of psychosis, awakening psychosis, right? Because I was going through a Kundalini Awakening that tipped over into psychosis. I had 1 episode on the new moon of August 2004 and 1 episode on the new moon of September 2004. I stopped taking medication 6 months later. And how did I know that I was ready to stop? So I had moved back to New Zealand and I was completely sober, stopped drinking alcohol, stopped all drugs, etc. I mean, I had been living a party lifestyle in Whistler, BC, and I had been doing a lot of mind consciousness expanding work with mostly mushrooms. I had LSD like twice, I think, in total. It did precipitate the first psychosis. Like, it was a quarter of a tab, though. It wasn't it may have been the tip over factor. And I stopped smoking weed, etc. as well. And so I was back in New Zealand. I was completely sober. I was doing the work. Like, I was showing up and doing consistent daily yoga and meditation. I had systematically and thoroughly reviewed all of the factors that led up to the awakening psychosis so I could understand what had generated that particular response in my psyche. I'd just gone on the deep dive rabbit hole of healing, and I had taken 100% responsibility for my healing journey. I was not seeing any medical professionals at all. I wasn't seeing anyone in mental health, partly because I knew that what had happened for me wasn't just a mental health issue, that it was also related to spirituality, that it was related to Kundalini Awakening. And the mental health practitioners that I could have seen, they had no context for that. So from my perspective, it didn't make sense to be seeing someone whose frame or context for what I was going through was much more narrow, much more limited, very mechanicistic, very biology based, etc., than the frame or the context with which I was viewing my experience, which was holistic, interrelated, awakening, etc. Now, I knew I was ready to stop because none of the mitigating factors that led to the psychosis. There was intense emotional stress due to the relationship that I was in. I was no longer in that relationship. I wasn't in a relationship with anyone. I was living with some of my best girlfriends. My mum was like a half-hour drive away. And so when I decided, like, I'm doing all of the work, I'm feeling really stable, I'm exercising, doing yoga, doing meditation, etc., then I spoke to my mum and I spoke to my flatmates, my best friends, and I was like, okay, I'm going to start to cut down the medication that I'm on, and I want you to all be observing me to see if you notice any shift or change. So I was doing it in conjunction with my inner circle, with my community. And so I began to halve the medication, and I can't remember exactly what I did. Like, maybe I halved it for 2 weeks and then halved it again and then halved it again. That was the process that I went through. And I was just working intuitively. So then the question is, a lot of people relapse into psychosis after stopping meds. So what's the factor that made you heal? Okay, so there's a couple of things here. One, it may have made a difference because I didn't experience just psychosis as such. It was awakening / psychosis. And I feel like there is a difference between that and people that are experiencing psychosis that is only coming from mental and emotional health challenges, right? So that's one thing that can be different. Second factor was that I was deeply looking into the underlying causes that gave rise to psychosis. I didn't perceive what had happened through the biological model as in, the brain chemistry is off, so fix the great brain chemistry and then it will be okay. I was looking at it from the perspective of there's unresolved trauma generating certain behavior patterns, which when they go into extreme lead to this, right? So I was incredibly logical and had really mapped out the way that my psyche was functioning and what led into the psychosis. So if you are simply taking meds and you're not addressing the underlying causes, the trauma and all of that kind of thing, and then you stop taking meds, well, of course, it's quite likely you go back into psychosis because nothing has changed, right? So this is a key aspect, is how much have you shifted? How much trauma have you resolved? What kind of daily habits and routines have you got in place? How is your nervous system? How is your self-reflective ability, your self-awareness? All of those will impact whether or not, if you stop meds, you go into psychosis, right? Okay, I had a psychotic episode 2 years ago, and the psychiatrist has now told me I can stop medication to confirm the diagnosis of schizophrenia or not. How can I know if I'm ready to stop? Okay, I'm not an expert on any of this, and I also want to say that do research on schizophrenia as a diagnosis, because there is the medical model way of looking at it and perceiving it, which is often quite heavy on brain chemistry as an underlying cause, for example. But there's other more expansive, alternative, or holistic ways of perceiving schizophrenia. And when you've got a more holistic, expansive way of perceiving something, then often you've got a more expansive way of working with healing it, because you understand it within a much broader context. So the ways that you can work with healing it are much, much broader. And I think it is somewhat simplistic to say, let's see if you actually have it by seeing what happens when you come off the medication. I don't have all the studies at my fingertips or all the reports. I was just reading about it in a book called Coyote Wisdom or Coyote Healing. I wish I had it at my fingertips, but I don't. Do research on schizophrenia, look up Coyote Wisdom or Coyote Healing, and make sure that you have a much broader context and understanding of what it is, how it functions, and how it is often managed, mitigated, or healed using those more broader perspectives. How can I know if I'm ready to stop? Assess the conditions of your life. How stable? Do you have stable employment? Do you have stable relationships? Do you have stable housing? If there's a lot of stability there, that's one factor. You need to have a lot of stability in your physical foundation, and that includes finances, career, like your working situation, your housing situation, your friends, your family, etc. And then I would also look at how much do you understand the functioning of your mind and the trauma that you've experienced over the course of your life? How much of that trauma have you resolved? How self-reflective are you? How self-aware are you? Are you able to notice the thoughts that go through your mind without believing in them, and therefore without acting on them? All right? These are factors that are important. I would also look up the work of Dr. Paris Williams. Rethinking Madness is a really interesting book. I think this is maybe his PhD. He's done a lot of work on looking at the psyche and psychosis, and also patients who present as schizophrenic, and seeing that psychosis is often a last-ditch technique that the psyche uses to heal itself. And that if someone is going into a psychosis and a professional is able to hold the space so that person is kept safe and can interact with the person in psychosis without perceiving them as crazy, then sometimes that person will actually, the very act of going into the psychosis and being able to just let it be what it is can be incredibly healing, which is super interesting, right? And Dr. Paris Williams has a lot to say about medication, about how it's useful initially to stabilize so that you can do the work required, so that you can then get off it. And he recommends getting off it within 1 year to 2 years, because after a while the medication itself begins to impact your brain chemistry and how your brain functions, and it's much harder to get off the medication. That's what Dr. Paris Williams says. Up to if you've been taking it for more than 2 years, it becomes very difficult to get off it. So these are all factors to consider. Yeah. One important thing to recognize too is that when you are dealing with any kind of mental illness or even physical illness, like any kind of illness at all, is don't look to your doctor or your medical professionals to be the hero of your story. Make yourself the hero of your story and turn your medical professionals, your doctor, into your ally. Right? You need to lead. You need to be the one that actually does the research, understands intimately what's going on for you, and really looks internally and starts to understand and notice and track what's happening for you, so that you can clearly see how the psyche is functioning, what triggers the psyche, what impact the trauma is having on it, what impact relationship is having on it, what the healing is that needs to happen. And then use your medical professional to support you in that process, right? To support you in that process. So that's what I have to offer here. So I went off medication probably around March or June 2005. I have not gone into psychosis again and never had to use medication again either. Now, that doesn't mean that that's necessarily the right thing for you to do, because it's all about the conditions, right? The conditions of your body-mind interface and the conditions within which you are. There are an enormous amount of variables, right? There are so many variables, but hopefully this does give you some ideas of what you need to do in order to safely consider reducing the dose of medication and observing what happens to see if it's time for you to get off that, right? And like I say, I don't have any, medication is really useful when it's useful. And when it's not useful, it's not useful. You need to determine when that is for yourself. Alrighty. So much love to all of you that are on this journey of learning how to work skillfully with the psyche and learning how to resolve trauma and dissolve conditioning and live a liberated and free life. Yeah.